Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 7 complete guide where I'll be answering all of your key questions and discussing some of the players and teams we should be targeting over the upcoming game weeks. If you enjoyed today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, let's start with the major question of the game week for most people. Do you need to go out there and buy Arsenal players ahead of Game Week 7? And if so, what is the priority in terms of who you should be looking to bring into your team? Of course, for those people that wildcarded in Game Week 6, you very likely have at least 2 Arsenal, potentially 3. And if that's you, I think you're feeling pretty settled right now. I wouldn't be using transfers to switch them around. Even if you feel like you chose a slightly suboptimal Arsenal player, I would probably, for the most part, stick with who you've got. So I thought I would spend this first section just discussing who my favourite Arsenal assets are. So on your screen, I have listed my favourite 8, but you could pretty much arguably even pick other players. Like Zubimendi isn't on this list. Saliba isn't on this list. You could pretty much pick anyone in that starting 11 for Arsenal, and I think they would be fine. But my top 8 as of now, in order, is Gabriel, Raya, Timber, Calafiori as my top 4 defenders. Obviously, 3 defenders and a goalkeeper. Then Gyökeres, Saka, Eze and Rice. So, it might be quite surprising to you that Gyökeres and Saka are in 5th and 6th, and I've got 4 defensive options in 1, 2, 3 and 4. The simple reason for this is Arsenal have been now for about 3 seasons the best defence in the Premier League, and arguably the best defence in Europe, but very well so the best defence in the Premier League. Whether you look at eye test, whether you watch the games in which Arsenal just suffocate the opposition and feel like they dominate the game, but also the data is always ridiculous for them. And we are now at a position where we have data for the first 6 game weeks, and after the first 6 game weeks, Arsenal are once again the best defence in the league. Now, they're not a bad attack, and what I'm actually going to do is I'll jump over to Fantasy Football Hub to show you this. By the way, Fantasy Football Hub are still offering 50% off, so if you want to use my link down below, and you want to access all of the things that I use for these videos, make sure to do so. You get a discount and it supports me. So what I've done is I've gone over to their Opta Stats section. This is the really nerdy section of the website. And I've looked at XG and XGC. So XG is, of course, goal threat. And as you can see, Arsenal are 6th. So Manchester United, Palace, City, Brighton and Chelsea have all had more XG than Arsenal. But they're still doing pretty well. Almost 10 XG accumulated. They've got more XG than Liverpool, Brentford, Everton, Bournemouth, Spurs. Some of these teams have been attacking quite well. So Arsenal are by no means a bad attack. And actually, if you look at non-penalty expected goals, because other teams like Brighton have had quite a few pens, they're up in 5th. Just behind the likes of Chelsea and Manchester United. So Arsenal are not a bad attack, and do bear in mind, they've not had the easiest opening fixtures, Arsenal. Like, the good fixtures are now coming up. They've got Sunderland, Burnley and West Ham, of course, in the next 5 game weeks. However, if we then go back and look at expected goals conceded, they've only conceded 3.9 expected goals in the first 6 game weeks. To put that into perspective, Newcastle, who've defended incredibly well themselves, are at 4.6, here you can see, and Bournemouth at 5.4. You then go all the way down to Man City at 6.8 as the 4th best defence. So not only are Arsenal the best defence for data eye test, but they are quite comfortably one of the best. It's not really tight at the top as it is with, for example, the XG. So I guess what I'm essentially saying here, if we go back to the ranking and discuss the players, Arsenal's defence is an absolute joke. And as much as we are in a position, and I'm going to discuss a bit later today, defensive contributions in more detail. There's actually 2 sections today dedicated to talking about that. A clean sheet is worth double DEFCON. So if Gabriel gets 1 clean sheet every 2 games, for example, over this period, and Senesi or Anderson gets DEFCON every single game, Gabriel's still matching them. Plus, you chuck in the chance of bonus points when you get a clean sheet, and also a potential attacking return for some of these defenders. I just think the Arsenal defence are going to be absolutely elite. So if I was going to bring in an Arsenal asset this week, and I had free reign to do so, I would probably bring in a Arsenal defender. Now, Gabriel is at the top, and this is a little bit of a knee-jerk, because if you look at the underlying data, whilst he has shown some goal threat, Timber and Calafiori have ridiculous underlying data. So Gabriel was sat at 0.16 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Most of that comes from goal threat. That's not bad, and that's kind of where you expect Gabriel to roughly reside throughout the season. Around 0.2 is kind of the height that he hits, which means every 5 games or so, in this case every 7 or 8 games or so, Gabriel will accumulate roughly 1 expected goal. And that's kind of what you'd expect for Gabriel. You would expect around 4 or 5 goals a season. Timber and Calafiori are putting up ridiculous numbers. Timber is sat at 0.32 non-penalty expected goals per 90, and Calafiori is 0.27. That means every 3 games, Timber is expected to score a goal. And for Calafiori, every 4 games. Those are silly numbers. That's better than most of the attackers we're looking at. That's better than the likes of Iliman and Jaya. It's not far off Semenyo. If they can continue these numbers, and they can continue to start, Timber and Calafiori for me are the best defenders in FPL. So I will frame it this way. If you think Timber or Calafiori will start the next 5 games, I would absolutely, categorically go and buy them ahead of Gabriel. My concern with Timber and Calafiori, and the reason they're below Gabriel and Raya in the rankings, is I can't sit here confidently and say that. I think Lewis Skelly is brilliant. I think Ben White can absolutely do a job. Do I think Timber and Calafiori are better than those two? Yes, they're obviously first choice. But with Champions League, and I should note, I'm recording this on Tuesday evening, not Wednesday, so I haven't seen the game against Olympiacos. But with the Champions League, with all of these games, and also none of these defenders have a particularly great fitness record, especially Timber and White on that right side, you could just see Ben White starting against Burnley or Sunderland. Tell me you couldn't see that. And that's the concern. And I should note, you could potentially see Mosquera and Saliba start. You could see Gabriel on the bench. Gabriel doesn't have to start every game either, but his minutes certainly feel more secure at the moment. And we know Gabriel is fantastic in the air. There is, of course, this narrative going around West Ham just keep conceding goals from set pieces. Even with Nuno in charge now, they go and concede a goal from a set piece straight away. It does feel like a good game for him. But honestly, so if I was to rank the defenders, assuming that they all started every game, Timber would be top. Timber, if you watch the games, he looks like an attacker. Then Calafiori, then Gabriel. But due to minutes concerns, I've got Gabriel at the top. Raya in second is a tough one. He's a bit of a bad FPL option when you think about it deeply, because he doesn't make enough saves. The amount of times Raya finishes on 2 saves, it's so frustrating. In Game Week 6, he made 2 saves by half time and then didn't make a save for the entire second half. It's really frustrating owning him sometimes, but he is averaging 2.5 saves per 90, which is almost at a save point. And also, again, you have no concerns about Raya getting rotated. So yes, it is probably a 2 or a 6 pointer every week, but those 6 pointers do add up, and he's always towards the top 4 goalkeepers. So I went for Gabriel and Raya on my wildcard. I'm pretty happy with that. I would love to take a punt on Timber. Timber is the one to me that really stands out. Then obviously the attackers. And again, I'm not saying the attackers are bad, but if we are prioritising, the defence look a joke. I think Gyökeres versus Saka is extremely close. I don't think either of them have shown much this season, making me think that they are fantastic assets. Gyökeres obviously 0.3 non-penalty expected goals per 90. Saka down at 0.1, which is worse than Gabriel. It's pretty poor, but he's not played many minutes. He's obviously had injury concerns, so I expect that to increase. I think the way that I would view this, if you are looking for a long-term option that you want to keep in your team for 10 to 12 weeks, I think Saka is probably the one. Because I think once Havertz comes back, I really don't think Gyökeres starts every game. But as things stand, I just don't see them putting Marino up top when they've got Gyökeres there. He loves Havertz, Arteta, and I could see that happening. But I think Gyökeres will continue to start. With Saka, I also think he'll start pretty much every Prem game. In fact, he probably will start every Prem game. But we saw again, he comes off around 70. And as much as Gyökeres could get an early sub too, I guess with Saka, I need to see a bit more from him on a consistent basis. And I was actually more impressed than other people seem to have been around Gyökeres in Game Week 6. I think that was arguably his best performance in an Arsenal shirt. And I feel like things will start to click. And these are the kind of fixtures where I expect him to do quite well in games where Arsenal can dominate and he can get a few more chances. So, yeah, I think it's very close. A big swing for who you should go for would be penalties. And it's a bit of a shame that that penalty wasn't given from an FPL perspective, of course. I don't want Arsenal to get the penalty, but from an FPL perspective, it would have been really nice to see whether it was Gyökeres or Saka on pens. If you didn't see, Gyökeres gets fouled, Saka immediately grabbed the ball and held onto the ball. Now, we see players like Bruno Fernandes quite often just grab the ball and we know they're going to take it. So it could have just been Saka was so confident he was going to take it. But remember, Saka was wearing the armband. He was the captain. And we've seen with quite a lot of Premier League teams now, the captain or a leader in their team holds onto the ball until the last second and then passes it to the Premier League, the penalty taker. My gut feeling, considering his penalty record and considering how well he dispatched his first penalty, I still think Gyökeres is first choice. I wouldn't be surprised if they share them this season, though. So that would have been nice to know. But all in all, taking into account price, the positions they play, current fitness concerns, etc., I would probably say that Gyökeres is marginally ahead, but I think it is very close. And I also think you could take a punt on Eberechi Eze or Rice. Let's see how many minutes these players get in the Champions League. My concern with Eze is I think Ødegaard, more often than not, will start in the central role that Eze played in Game Week 6. And I think he looks really good in that role, but I just don't see both of them being in the team. Because if both of them are in the team, in the centre, that means you have to drop one of Rice or Zubimendi. Of course, Eze off the left and Ødegaard through the centre is quite possible, but then you've got Martinelli and Trossard there. So unless Ødegaard picks up an injury, or Martinelli maybe picks up an injury, I couldn't see myself going for Eze for those reasons, at least as a long-term pick. Maybe short-term he'd be okay. Declan Rice continues to tick along with assists, great at set pieces. He's not an awful option. Again, Saliba, absolutely fine. Like once he's in the starting 11, he'll probably be slightly better than Gabriel for DEFCON, but I just think you just go for the upside with Gabriel, Timber and Calafiori. Zubimendi, I think there are better cheap midfielders, as we'll discuss a bit later. So I think that's pretty much everyone covered there. Basically, look, if you can own 3 Arsenal moving forward across the next 5 weeks, I would do so. That's why I wildcarded 3 of them in. But I certainly think the defenders would be more of a priority transferring for me than the attackers, especially given now that Nuno is in charge of West Ham. This game was touted as being one of those games where Arsenal could score 4 or 5. You would say now with Nuno in charge, that's probably less likely. Even immediately against Everton, they looked a little bit better. So let me know about Arsenal, what you think. Sorry for a very long section. If I was going to take a punt, and I would be really punty with it, I like Timber, but I think for safety, someone like Gabriel is a little bit better. So guys, we're now going into Game Week 7, which means we have 6 game weeks worth of data. And if you've watched my videos for a while, you'll often hear me talk about the last 6 game weeks. It's actually a sample size I quite like to use. Even when we're later in the season, I'll often talk about the last 6. That doesn't really align with a lot of other more statistical, analytical-minded managers because, statistically speaking, the larger the sample size, the better. Because you've got more and more data, and single events, single anomalies are less likely to skew the data. It's probably more reliable and representative the larger the sample gets. But I also feel like when you use season-long data, you are also missing out on more subtle recent trends, which could be to do with form, confidence, a different position, one player being injured, which means the other player is getting into more central positions, for example. So I like the last 6, which is perfect because we now have 6 game weeks worth of data. At the start of the season, because it's such a small sample, I don't want to draw too many conclusions from it. So what I thought would be interesting is to look at the top 20 players for non-penalty expected goal involvement over the first 6 game weeks. Again, all of this data courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub. There will be a link down below. So, how ridiculous is Erling Haaland? This is non-penalty expected goal involvement. 7.9 in 6 games. It's ridiculous. When you then look that in second place, we still have Bryan Mbeumo, by the way, who I think is still a really nice option at 3.3. So it's well over double that of second place in the Premier League. Like Haaland is just playing a ridiculous level. One of the questions was, is it worth breaking your team to get Haaland in? The answer is probably yes. Brentford are the 4th worst defence this season for expected goals conceded. So, yes, this is absolutely a player that you still want in your team, and I absolutely think is probably the best captaincy option for Game Week 7 as well. That you don't need me to tell you, though. Other players that are over 3 non-penalty expected goal involvement so far this season, Bryan Mbeumo, playing very well. Mateta as well, getting lots. He missed 3 big chances in Game Week 6. Now, you don't want him missing the chances, but at least he's getting them. Enzo Fernandez at 3.1. And in the absence of Palmer, we've spoke about Enzo Fernandez recently, should potentially or could potentially be on penalties, might share them with Joao Pedro, and also playing in that advanced role. Now, we think Palmer will be back post-international break, but if that is extended, Enzo's great. And I even think when Palmer's in the team, Enzo's still a fine option. So a player to definitely consider. Ismail Assar, I think, is one of the most underrated midfielders in FPL. He is someone that I would love to have in my team. And if I think about mistakes on the wildcard, maybe I would have liked to go for someone like Ismail Assar in my midfield. Other players that stand out, Chris Wood has been getting so many chances. This is like the opposite of what you expect from Chris Wood. Last season, Wood wouldn't have been here. Wood wouldn't have been on this list because he didn't actually get many chances, but he finished absolutely everything. This season, it's the opposite. He had 6 shots in Game Week 6 and only had 1 of them on target. This man is accumulating a lot of XG. He's just not doing much with it so far. And I know he's already returned a few times, but In comparison to what we saw last season, from 3xG, Chris Wood would already be on about 8 or 9 goals. So probably unlikely that a player will continue to overperform their XG by that much. Anthony. Actually, we're going to discuss Anthony a bit later in one of the sections, but he is a player that is not only passing the eye test and actually delivering the returns, because XG is all well and good if you're not going to deliver. Anthony's actually delivering on that. What I do find interesting, Semenyo, 2.6. Now, that is decent data. You can see it puts him in the top 10, but also goes to show that maybe he has been slightly overperforming his expected data as well. You've got Minte in there at 2.6 and Esteban at 2.2. So these are all players that are picking up really good data. Other players that are still on this list as well. Bruno Fernandes is still in the top 13, I think that is. I think he's 13th there. So even without the pens, he's not been terrible in terms of creating chances and getting chances himself. Gyökeres is in the top 20 as well. So again, even if you remove the penalty, and there have been games where he's barely had a shot, he's still not putting up horrible underlying data. I think that's pretty much it. By the way, I think Timber here is the only defender to sneak in. So we just discussed how ridiculous Timber's data is. It's so ridiculous that he even sneaks into the top 20 here as the only defender. So these are the players that I would probably be looking to target, or at least, maybe I should rephrase that, the players that thus far this season have put up the best underlying data. But two things. They need to convert. So if you don't feel like these players are good enough finishers to convert, consider that. But also you need it to continue. So if you think it was the result of easier fixtures, maybe a couple of tap-ins that skewed the data, then obviously you need to consider that as well. So guys, keeping in line with the previous section where I said we now have 6 game weeks worth of data, I thought it would also be interesting to look at the players that are picking up the most defensive contributions across the opening 6 game weeks as well. And of course, this could change. It could be that across the next 6, a completely different set of players start picking them up. But this is kind of in line with what we expected. Lots of these players had good defensive contribution statistics last season, and a lot of that is carried across. There aren't many players really where they were really good last year and they're not this year, or vice versa. So I think this is feeling quite representative. There is a discussion to be had, by the way, about whether I should be presenting DEFCON per 90 stats or whether I should be presenting like success rate or hit rate. Because realistically, if someone's averaging 11 per 90 but they've never hit it as a midfielder, for example, then that's not overly useful. But I think this at least gives us an indication about the players that are getting lots of defensive contributions. I should note for this graphic here, I've separated it into defenders and midfielders. So on the previous graphic, it was one long list. Because obviously midfielders need 12 and defenders need 10, I thought I would separate it here. So for those on audio, I will read out the defenders and discuss them, and then I'll do the midfielders after. So the top 10 defenders for DEFCON per 90 is Senesi with 13.5, the DEFCON monster himself. Mukiele with 12.8, Van Dijk with 12, Tarkowski at 11.3, Anderson with 11, Alderete with 10.9, Richards with 10.5, and then Lacroix, Esteve, and Ekdal with 10.3. There were a few other players that also crept just above the 10, which means that we have at least 10 defenders that are averaging over the threshold per 90. Now, not all of these have hit it every week. Obviously, Senesi is the only one to have done so. But when you then compare that with the midfielders list, only 6 players are averaging over 12 DEFCON per 90. So it definitely feels like the defenders at the moment are a little bit more consistent. In fact, in the midfielders, there aren't any midfielders that have even got close, I don't think, to hitting DEFCON on every single occasion. Anderson may be quite unfortunate in those opening few, but definitely the defenders are having more success thus far. We'll have to assess if that continues moving forward. So back on the defenders, I should note, by the way, I've removed players that haven't had many minutes. So these are only players that have achieved a certain number of minutes because it just makes it a little bit easier rather than looking at players that have played only 100 minutes or something like that. So obviously we know Senesi is Mr. DEFCON himself. 13.5 is quite ridiculous when you only need 10. And of course, Senesi is now officially the only player to pick up 12 defensive contribution points. He's picked up DEFCON in all 6 of the opening games. Tarkowski failed to do so in Game Week 6, which means it's just Senesi now. And at 4.9 million, I know he's already risen 0.4 million, but he is just brilliant. The reason I like Senesi more than any other defender in the game, even more than Gabriel, is not only is Senesi ridiculous for DEFCON, he's also extremely good in the air. The assist in Game Week 6 wasn't lucky, it was a great assist because he's got a great leap on him. In previous seasons, if you've played FPL for 2-3 years, the season before last, Senesi was putting up crazy sort of XG data. He's actually quite a goal threat. So I'm not saying he's going to be as much of a goal threat as a Gabriel, for example, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't pick up a few goals across the season, maybe 2 or 3. And also, Bournemouth sit third for expected goals conceded in the Premier League this season. So if I wrap that all up together, Senesi's playing in, so far this season, the third best defence with goal threat, bit of assist threat, good for bonus, exceptional for DEFCON, and he's less than 5 million. If you told me Senesi was 5.5 million, I'd still pick him. If you told me he was 6, I still would at least contemplate it, which tells me, even if you've not bought Senesi at this stage, 4.9 million is still ridiculously cheap. Mukiele and Alderete both on this list in terms of Sunderland and defenders and 4 million defenders, and also Estev creeps onto the list. You'll notice there is no Leeds defence. So if you're looking purely at DEFCON, definitely the Sunderland defenders stand out. Now, Mukiele has been ridiculously good for DEFCON. Alderete down at 10.9, Mukiele 12.8. However, there is a chance that Mukiele moves to right back at some point, and if he moves to right back, he still could get DEFCON, don't get me wrong. But Alderete I would then expect to get slightly more. And also, if you watch the games, Alderete is the one that they aim for from set pieces more often than not. So believe it or not, I still think Alderete is a slightly better option, but both look like they could offer good value, and Estev will still tick along. Rodon is just below, just out of the list, so I still don't mind him, by the way, because I think Leeds have been very good defensively. But certainly if you're targeting DEFCON only, then you're looking at those Sunderland defenders. Van Dijk and Tarkowski, 2 expensive options that are on the list and in the top 4. My issue with Liverpool is they just can't seem to keep a clean sheet at the moment. Even in the Champions League, losing 1-0. Alisson Becker went off injured. Mamardashvili came on for him, by the way, and he's 4.3 million. I just had to go check that he is definitely 4.3 million. So if Alisson is out, I've not seen an update on it, then obviously he could even become a potential option. And I don't think he's a bad backup goalkeeper, but that could even make them slightly weaker. Soboslai has been playing at an exceptionally high level when he plays right back, but Frimpong and Bradley aren't doing it. Kirkes and Robertson, I've not been impressed by Kirkes, and Kanate is just not good enough to play in that Liverpool team. Their defence just isn't very good right now. They're sat 9th for expected goals conceded. I just think you can do better than going for Virgil van Dijk in terms of clean sheets. And he's not going to be one of the top defenders, I don't think, this season for goals either. So yes, he's very good for DEFCON. And if Liverpool can tighten up at the back, great. But I'm just not feeling it. Like, Tarkowski, for me, will get as much DEFCON as Van Dijk. Maybe slightly fewer clean sheets, but it's probably worth the saving. But really, I look at it now and I'm thinking, why would you go Virgil van Dijk or Tarkowski when you've got Anderson and Richards at cheaper price, 4.5 million for the pair of them, and they're going to probably get you just as many DEFCON, and even in the case of Richards, more clean sheets. So I think defenders-wise, at the moment, the 3 best defenders in the game are Gabriel, Senesi, and Richards. If you're going to pick 3 of them on a wild card, it would be those 3 and then fill in the final 2 spots. So in terms of the midfielders, we're going to discuss in the next section whether it's actually worth going for DEFCON midfielders. It's one of the things that I'm contemplating a lot right now is, do you still want to target DEFCON? Because they're not finding it as easy to hit DEFCON as the defenders. And in comparison to the defenders, Juve is on 4 assists this season, by the way. And I think he's, let me check this, I think he's on like 23 points. Yeah, 23 points. If I compare that to Anderson, who's had, I think, 1 clean sheet and no attacking returns, Anderson is on 26 points. So I feel like with the defenders, the attacking threat isn't enough. You need clean sheets, but more importantly, DEFCON. So with the defenders, I think it's really worth targeting DEFCON. With the midfielders, I'm having that debate, but let's at least discuss some of them and then we'll move on to that debate. So the midfielders that are picking up defensive contributions, Caicedo is top with 14.2. And he was top of midfielders last season as well. So if you are targeting one person that will pick up defensive contributions, it is Caicedo. Andre of Wolves at 13.8. Anderson, like I said, got so close in the opening 3 game weeks with 11 in each of them. He's averaging 13.2. So still, even under Ange, I expect Anderson to be the definition of a DEFCON monster. Granit Xhaka, a player going very under the radar, doing extremely well this season at 12.7. Adams at 12.3. And another player going under the radar, Garner of Everton, I think has been really good. I watched Monday Night Football against West Ham and I was very impressed by Garner, taking a lot of set pieces. He's got a brilliant delivery on him. And if he's picking up DEFCON as well, he could be nice. You've then got Cullen, Bentancur, Soboslai, and Ampadu, all just under the 12 threshold. None of these stand out as being game breakers. And again, we're going to have a discussion in a minute whether it's even worth targeting them. But I think out of this list here, Caicedo, Anderson, Xhaka, and probably Garner stand out as the 4 of... And by the way, that's James Garner of Everton, not Garner Gay. So I think they are the 4 that probably stand out as being decent options to go and get. Hopefully that is clear. if you're just going to take one thing from this, go and buy Senesi. So guys, I just started the discussion in the previous section around whether it's actually worth going for these defensive contribution players, or whether it's worth in the midfield, or worth going for players that could pick you up attacking returns, in particular having a bit of goal threat. So the question is, when picking the cheap midfielder, should we be looking for attacking threat or DEFCON potential? And what is the best long-term play for our teams? This discussion is actually inspired by a chat that they were having on Above Average, where Baker said that he thinks actually with the midfielders, it might be worth going for those players like Jadon Anthony that can go and score you goals, or just at least have that attacking threat. And the more I think about it, the more I do wonder if this is the play, because like I said, the midfielders, whilst there are some that are doing it on a consistent basis, they aren't so far doing it as consistently as the defenders. And with defenders, I can't think of anyone in the Premier League at a cheap price where they're an incredible goal threat, like where you can see them getting lots of goals in a season. And with assists, they're only getting 3 points. I told you, Juve has the joint most assists in the Premier League, and he's not even in the top 20 for defenders' overall points. So I think with the defenders, again, it makes sense to target DEFCON, but with the midfielders, if they're not hitting DEFCON as often, and you have players like Jadon Anthony that can go and get you goals on a consistent basis, and he's putting up the data to continue doing so, a goal every 3 games or so, the data would suggest, then that's probably better, because a midfielder picks up 5 points for a goal versus 2 points you get for DEFCON, so you need Xhaka to get DEFCON 3 times to basically match a Jadon Anthony goal, because if Anthony scores, he'll probably get you at least 1 bonus as well. So, if it was just as simple as saying, do you want X player who gets DEFCON every game, or Y player who gets you a goal every 3 games or so, I'd maybe chase the upside with the goal scorer. However, it's not that simple, because someone like Granit Xhaka or Anderson, they could also go and get you attacking returns, whereas someone like Jadon Anthony is not going to regularly get you DEFCON. So I don't want to disregard options like Xhaka as only being a DEFCON guy, even Caicedo, when very clearly these assets can also get you a few assists and goals across the season. So if I was to summarise what you would want in an ideal world, what you want in an ideal world is a player that gets you DEFCON very regularly, but also can get you goals and assists. And that's why someone like Xhaka stands out to me right now. If I just bring up his data in front of me. So he's got, obviously, DEFCON in quite a few games. And, I mean, in some of those games, it's been ridiculous, by the way. He had 18 against Palace and 20 against Nottingham Forest. So he stands out as a player moving forward. I could see doing it quite often. But also, he's putting up okay assist threat. So 0.23 against Nottingham Forest, 0.11 against Crystal Palace, 0.1 against Brentford. He's creating the odd few chances here and there. There's a small chance he takes pens, he takes some set pieces, and he's getting really good minutes as well. Same with Elliot Anderson, by the way. Elliot Anderson is another player, probably data even better than Xhaka, where it feels like he, yes, will get DEFCON a lot, but also can go and get you the odd assist and goal as well. So yeah, on similar games, 0.28 in Game Week 1, 0.25 in Game Week 5. So he's also a player creating too. So I guess what you need to be looking at, do you feel like there is a player, like a Jadon Anthony, that can get you a goal every 3 games or so? If they can't get you a goal every 3 to 4 games, and you don't think there's a player that will do it that consistently, then maybe just target the DEFCON. That's sort of the point at which you pivot in either direction. Probably the more optimal play, if you were to play based on like playing in an optimal manner and try and optimize points, is probably to pick a DEFCON guy, because you know they will tick along and they're quite consistent with it. But I certainly think in terms of cheap midfielders right now, Granit Xhaka for me does stand out, because I like a lot of what I'm seeing from Sunderland. I think he's playing well. The minutes are there, like I say, some set pieces. And also, I think longer term, I wouldn't be surprised if he even sneaks above Caicedo for DEFCON. Let me know what you're thinking around these cheaper midfielders. I think you can go either way with it. With the defenders, I think go DEFCON. Midfielders, choose your poison. So I had to have a discussion around Joao Pedro. There has been a rumour or a stat going around that he hasn't taken a shot in 3 games. It's not much better than that. He has taken 1 shot. So that stat is false. He's taken the 1 shot in 3 games, but it was in Game Week 4. So in Game Week 5 and 6, he's not had a single shot. But he's also played with 10 men for the majority of those games. So the red card and the context there has to be taken into account. But I would say generally he's not looked very good. Even with the 10 men and the red cards, Joao Pedro has not been performing at a high level even within himself, but he's also having to do a lot of running and closing down, and that's not what Joao Pedro does best. He is best with the ball at his feet, dribbling, making those late runs into the box, and he's not had the ability to do so. We also know that Joao Pedro is best as a 10, playing off a number 9, and they've got no Delap to play there. They've got no one that can play as that number 9 in the team. They don't fancy playing Guiu there by the sounds of it. So I do think that this team right now, without Palmer in the team, without a recognised number 9, it is making it very difficult for Joao Pedro, I think, to function as effectively as he could. I think there's no doubt about that. So do contextualise with the red cards, but I think even without them, I wouldn't have expected watching Chelsea that he would have done crazy well over these games. But then also, the XG before that, even in games where there was no 9, has been pretty good. Like his XG for every game so far is 0.28, 0.41, 0.66, 0.15, then 0.0. So he was putting up okay data. And my issue with Joao Pedro is the fixtures coming up are just so good for Chelsea after the Liverpool game. And to some extent, the Liverpool game. Liverpool can't keep a clean sheet at the moment. Their defensive frailties are obvious in every single game. They've lost back-to-back games. How often do you say that? They're not in a particularly good moment right now either. So I don't even hate that. You've then got a Forest game where Forest aren't the same team they were under Nuno. People seem to think Sunderland are like the best defence ever to grace the Premier League. They're fine. I think they're 8th for XGC. But Sunderland at home is a nice fixture. Then it's Spurs, Wolves, Burnley. I look at those 6. None of those 6 teams are defending that well. In fact, the team with the best defensive data out of those 6 is probably just Liverpool, then Sunderland. And both teams I still think can be got at. So yeah, and obviously they're both home games for Chelsea too. So the fixtures are absolutely there. What was interesting is on Monday, we had news from Maresca where he said Joao Pedro, Caicedo and Andre Santos needed assessing before the Champions League clash with Benfica, as they all had small problems. Joao Pedro was on the bench. He came on in the 61st minute. He had 0 shots, 6 passes, and only 3 of them were successful. He had 12 touches, and then he got sent off in the 96th minute. It was 2 yellow cards, which means he will miss their next Champions League game. And their next Champions League game takes place between Nottingham Forest and Sunderland, between Gameweek 8 and 9. From an FPL perspective, that's actually lovely. Because he obviously will come back from the international break between 7 and 8. Let's assume he goes, which I think he will. We often know that Joao Pedro after the international break does struggle a bit. So if he came back from the international break with Forest, Champions League, Sunderland, I would have had some concerns. But if he can't play in the Champions League anyway, surely he starts Sunderland and Forest and gets good minutes in them. So I don't actually mind that he got sent off. But all of that to say, is Joao Pedro playing at a high level right now? No. Do Chelsea look free-flowing in the attack? No. But put in the context of the red cards, who are you moving to at the moment that is much better than Joao Pedro? I don't see anyone. Even a Gyökeres, I'm not that convinced. Unless it's to get to Haaland, and you have the money to do so, great. Other than that, I would keep him. I'm going to keep him probably until at least Game Week 12. And then we can assess after that unless something else crops up. Let me know what your plans are. But yeah, I don't think we're quite at panic stations yet. So guys, just a quick fire answer some of your other questions that I obviously don't want to make this video ridiculously long. So Sanchez or Dubravka, is it worth wasting my only free transfer on a 1-week goalkeeper or roll into wildcard 8? So on Sanchez versus Dubravka, I actually think this is extremely close. I think Dubravka's probably got the greatest chance of a clean sheet for me, but I think quite confidently, actually, I think both concede. I think Villa will score, and I think Liverpool will score. What I would base this on is who do you own? If you own Rodgers and Watkins, start Sanchez. If you own Salah and Gakpo, start Dubravka. I would basically put all of your eggs in the basket of, if you've got attackers from one team, start the other goalkeeper. In terms of if it's worth making a transfer, if you're wildcarding in 8, absolutely not. Best case scenario, Raya gets probably 6. Sanchez or Dubravka will get 2 or 3. That's best case scenario. You make the transfer. You've gained 4 points. I value a transfer even if it's not a hit at 4 points. So no, it's not worth it. If you're wildcarding in 13, absolutely. I'd even say borderline it's worth a hit to bring in Raya. So it really depends on your wildcard window. If you've already wildcarded or you're wildcarding later, I would make the transfer. If you're wildcarding in 8, don't think it's worth it for 1 week. Would you take a hit for Gabriel? No, is the short answer. Because again, can Gabriel score? Yes. Can he get bonus? Yes. Can he get DEFCON? Probably not in a game like this, no. So 6 points is probably likely for Gabriel, is to think of all of the possibilities. So again, if you take out, I don't know, Juf for Gabriel or someone like Dorgu, let's say Dorgu gets 2 and Gabriel gets 6, you've just paid back the hit. You've not actually gained anything there. So there aren't many situations where I would take a hit for a defender, unless you're like, I really think Gabriel's going to score this week. I've got a feeling, I think he might get a 15-pointer, then it might be worth it. Is Bruno a sell if he blanks against Sunderland? I would argue Bruno's probably a sell even if he doesn't blank. We don't know that he's still on pens. The fixtures aren't really there. And he's a lot of money for a penalty-taking DEFCON monster. And he's not even in the top 10 DEFCON midfielders as we saw earlier. So yeah, I think he's a sell regardless. If he also looks bad against Sunderland, it gives you even more of a motive to sell him. The next question, who are the best 4.5 to 5 million defenders to buy? Anderson, Richards, Senesi. The 3 guys that are most likely to get you DEFCON. I also would chuck in some of the 4 million defenders in there. if you feel like your squad can take it, I would still consider them. I think especially the Leeds and Sunderland defenders look pretty good. Is it too early to move on to Isak or wait and see? So Ekatike went off in the Champions League. I'm recording this straight after that, so I've not seen the diagnosis, but it looked like it might be hamstring. I still think Isak looks pretty set to start Game Week 7 regardless. And then it's an international break where he can build up more fitness. I think Isak could be a really nice option. Do I think this is the week to go and do it? No. Do I think you're going to gain a massive amount by going early? No. But if you're telling me that you need to move to a forward, you don't fancy Gyökeres and you have the money, I'd be very tempted to go for Isak. So I don't think it's too early, but I also don't think it's the perfect entry point or time to go and buy him. The final question, and I think a really nice place to end this, was what do we do if we've had 6 bad game weeks to start the game, and the game feels flat, unfun, or miserable? Trust the process or take some calculated punts. I always advise people, you need to think about why you play the game. Why do you play FPL? Like, what is it that brings you joy? Is it doing the research? Is it just winning your mini leagues? Is it having fun and owning differential players and getting those sorts? Is it having fun with captaincy? Like, what brings you joy in FPL? Something I will say, which is very underrated as a way to bring you joy in FPL, is points. As much as I don't think the end outcome should only be like, I only play to do really well, that's the only reason I do FPL, you have to enjoy the process. It's definitely more enjoyable when you get good game week scores. And obviously, if you had more points, you'd be happier. So my honest advice is probably to trust the process and keep making good decisions. You will then get more points, and in doing so, you'll enjoy the game more. So I'll use myself as the example. I wildcarded into what feels like the template, like everyone has the same team as I do. So you could say that's not very fun. And in all honesty, when I put the wildcard together, it wasn't overly fun building the wildcard, but I then get a 2.3 million green arrow. I'm really happy with the way the team looks. I'm enjoying FPL this week. So at the end of the day, doing well will probably lead to enjoyment. So I would probably say, trust the process, continue making good decisions. Don't take punts when we're in game week 7, unless that is how you get joy from the game. If the reason you're not enjoying the game isn't due to points, but it's due to your team feeling like it's the same as everyone else, then of course, take the punts. But otherwise, I would just continue doing what you're doing. You're probably a good manager if you've been playing for years, and you know how to get points in the end. You've probably just been quite unlucky at the start. So there we go. Those are tons of questions throughout this video answered. If there are any more that I've not answered, please do let me know down below in the comments. So guys, there we have it. That is the complete Game Week 7 guide. Hopefully you have found that useful. And if you have, please do smash that like button and make sure to subscribe as well. Until next time, bye-bye.